Today's daf is Chulin daf Yud Dalid, and we are at the Mishnah, 7 lines from the bottom of daf Yud Gimel Amid Beis. Today's daf is being learned as a schus refuah shalema for Eliezer Yeshaya ben Bracha. Today's daf is also being learned le'ilui nishmas Chaya bas Jamila. So we're moving along in the first parak of Maseches Chulin, discussing mi v'mi hashoichten. The Masechta opened Hakol Shoichtin Ushchitasen Ksheira Chutz Micheresh Shoita V'Katan Shema Yekalklu Eshchitasan V'Kulan Sheshachtu V'Acherim Royan Oisan Shchitasen Ksheira. This Mishnah is Miot HaKamos but Roiva Echos. There's so much there. Hakol Shoichtin, even a Tameh, even a Kuti, even a Mumor Eichel Nevelis L'Teyavin, even a Mumcha Alpha Pisha in a Muchsek or a Muchsek Alpha Pisha in a Mumcha. The Mishnah says mefurish that even though a Cheresh Shoit of a Katan there's a concern Shema Yekalkalu, but Bidi Eved if a Cheresh Royan Noisan Shchitas and Ksheira. The second Mishnah we saw that when it comes to an Ovid Koichavim, Shchitas Ovid Koichavim Nevela. Umetamba b'masa. This next Mishnah here in Maseches Chulin is going to discuss, amongst other things, it's a one-line Mishnah, whether or not a summa is allowed to shecht. Zok the Mishnah, hasheichit balayla, if somebody shechts at night, v'chin hasumma sheshachat, or a summa that shechts, shchita sekshera, his shchita is going to be kosher. So what does the Mishnah say? Shchita balayla, and the shchita of a summa is kosher. Why would you think it's a problem? Because if you can't see, how are you going to get the shchita right? You have to make sure that you get roiv of the two simanim, and you have to conform with the 5 halachas l'Moshe Misinai. You have to be boidik the sakin. There's a lot of things that you have to do. So you would think that maybe balayla or a summa should not be okay. Kamash Malan, it's going to be kosher. Now we're already trained in the first 2 weeks of Masechtas Chulin to be medayik the lishonis of the Mishnah. Is the Mishnah talking in a lechatchila dig way or in a b'di'evid way? The Mishnah said hashoichet balayla v'chein hasuma shachat Shechitasai kisheira, says the Gemara, Hashaychit, the Evidin, Lachatchilalai. And it's not just the word Hashaychit, the whole short Mishnah seems to suggest that Shchita balayla and the Shchita vasuma is only kosher b'di'evet. Viramini, I'll ask you a kasha as it relates to Shchita balayla being only kosher b'di'evet from a brayso. Lo'olam shoichten, you're always allowed to shecht. Bein bayoim, ubein balayla, bein beroish hagag, bein beroish hasvina. But what do you see from here? Lo'olam shoichten balayla. It sounds like you're allowed to shecht balayla lechatchila. So we have a stira. Hashaychit balayla is mashma only b'di'evet. Lo'olam shoichten ubein balayla is mashma that you could do it even lechatchila. Amar Papa said that when the Brisa says that you're allowed to shech lechatchila balayla she'avuka kenegdai, it's talking about when he had light. So even though it was nighttime, but at the same time there was a proverbial light bulb, and as a result, being that he had light, that's when it's going to be kosher lechatchila. When the Mishnah says asheichet balayla, which implies it's only kosher b'di'evet, is talking about where there was no avuka kenegdai, being that it's takafins the choshech. So it's for that reason b'di'evet it's going to be kosher, but lechatchila it's not going to be okay. Ravashi said dekonami. It's actually meduyik very much from the Mishnah and the Brisa respectively, like Rav Papa's distinction. Why diktani hasam? Because the Brisa that said lo oilam sheichten bein bayom u bein balayla, so it put Laila together with what? It put Laila together with yom dumya de yom. By day you can see, thus Laila is where, although it's night, but proverbially it's somewhat day. Why? Because there's an avuka kenegdai. The Hacha in the Mishnah, it put Laila together with what? It put it together with a summa. V'hacha dumya de summa. A summa can't see, so it's yitachin that the Laila is also a zasor Laila where you can't see, where it's dark outside, and there's no avuka kenegdai. Shma Mina said Ravashi, final word in the sugya, kedarkei b'kodesh, that it's actually meduyak. I like this piece of Gemara. I think it should be part and parcel of the formation of the Talmud, because it actually makes a lot of sense. The Mishnah is talking about a summa doimet to Laila. The Brisa is talking about a summa that's doimet to Yom. Either way, we're going to get back to this sugya of shchita summa be'ezras Hashem in the raid. But for now, we turn our attention to the next sugya here in Masechtas Chulin, a sugya that is going to be melava us knee deep into tomorrow's daf. Begins with another very short Mishnah, but a Mishnah that reverberates very much in the world of raid. There's so much related to this Mishnah. unfortunately, we're not even going to get to the read on this Mishnah today. But classic nonetheless. Zok the Mishnah. If somebody shechts on Shabbos or on Yom Kippur, even though he's chayiv misa for what it is he did. If somebody shechts on Shabbos, he's chayiv misa's bezdin. If somebody shechts on Yom Kippur, Zok Rashi, he's chayiv kares. But despite the fact that this person is mischayiv benafshe shchitas ikshera, the shchit is going to be kosher. So what's the topic of this Mishnah? If somebody shechts on Shabbos, if somebody shechts on Yom Kippur, he's chayiv misa. Okay. But then again, there's always a silver lining. Shchitas ikshera, at least he could have dinner. But the bottom line is that shchita b'Shabbos and shchita on Yom Kippur is kosher. Now here too, hashoichet b'Shabbos b'di'evet. There's not going to be any stira to this, right? Hashoichet b'Shabbos is b'di'evet, and hashoichet b'Yom Kippurim is b'di'evet. Obviously, you're not allowed to do it lechatchila. But b'di'evet, the halacha is shchitas ikshera. Zok the Gemara. Amar Rav Huna. Rav Huna said, Dara shchia barav. Mishmei de Rav. Rav's son Chia said over in the name of his great father. What did he say? That even though the Mishnah says Asheichet b'Shabbos u'b'Yom Kippurim shchitas ikshera, but asura ba'achila l'yoyma. But at the same time, on the day itself, on Shabbos and on Yom Kippur, you're not going to be able to eat it. Now, the fact that you can't eat it on Yom Kippur is pretty intuitive. The chiddush is that you won't be able to eat it on Shabbos either. So, in as much as shchitas ikshera, but there's a din that if you want to eat it on Shabbos, that's not going to be okay. Truth is, the Gemara b'Meshech HaSugya, Rashi quotes it. We'll see it in tomorrow's daf. It's on daf Tezvav. Is going to say that the makar to this is from the fact that the Mishnah juxtaposes Shabbos and Yom Kippur is for sure asura ba'achila l'yoyma, simply because it's Yom HaKudesh. So as it relates to Shabbos, it's going to be the same way. But the bottom line is, this is what Rav Huna said over, that Chia barav darshaned in the name of Rav. So this is attributed to Rav, as we'll see later in the daf. The names matter. But Rav said that as much as Achshoichet b'Shabbos shchitas ikshera, but at the same time asura ba'achila l'yoyma. Says the Gemara. V'nasvin chavraya l'meimah. So the chavraya, the oilam, they got together in Beis Medrash and they said Rabbi Yehuda that when Rav said that it's asura ba'achila l'yoyma, and they had a diak in the Mishnah, but when Rav said this, it has to be because he understood that the Mishnah is Rabbi Yehuda, and in the world of Rabbi Yehuda, it makes sense that it should be Asura ba'achila b'yoyma. Says the Gemara, hi Rabbi Yehuda. Which Rabbi Yehuda did the Chavraya think was or is the makar to why it would be that Asheichet b'Shabbos shchitas ikshera? It means there is some Rabbi Yehuda out there in the world that seems to say that even if you want to argue that Asheichet b'Shabbos shchitas ikshera, but at the same time Asura b'achila l'yoyma, we're going to stelzu some shitas Rabbi Yehuda. He didn't say this halacha mefurish, it's a tzushtal, and the Gemara wants to know Hi Rabbi Yehuda. Now this question of Hi Rabbi Yehuda is going to be the topic of the balance of today's daf and the first 2/3 of tomorrow's daf as well. The Gemara is going to try to figure out Hi Rabbi Yehuda, which Rabbi Yehuda is there in Shas that would be the makar to say that even though Asheichet b'Shabbos shchitas ikshera, but Asur b'achila l'yoyma. Now in today's daf, just to set this up, we're going to go through 4 attempts. They're all going to be failed attempts, and then Be'ezus Hashem in tomorrow's daf, we'll see the ending to this story. So says the Gemara, Rab Abba took the first crack at it, and he said, Rabbi Yehuda de'achanohi. I think what the Chavraya meant to say was they wanted to shtel to Rabbi Yehuda in the sugya of achana. So a tiny bit of background to Rab Abba's teretz, and really it's a tiny bit of background to the entire daf. And that is, we know, when you learn Hilchas Shabbos, Masechta Shabbos, there's a machlokes Rabbi Yehuda and Rab Shimon, yesh muktzah or ein muktzah. In fact, there are 3 machlokes in Rabbi Yehuda and Rab Shimon that underpin and permeate the entirety of Masechta Shabbos. In all 3 cases, Rabbi Yehuda is the machmer, and Rab Shimon, with his koyach ta'atera, is the mekel. Rabbi Yehuda is machmer in the sugya of muktzah. He holds the yesh muktzah. Rabbi Yehuda is machmer in the sugya of davar she'eino mischaven, and Rabbi Yehuda is machmer in the sugya of malacha she'eino tzricha legufa. In contrast to Rabbi Shimon, who's mekel in all 3 cases. By the way, we've spoken so much about this over the years that in all 3 of these machloikesin, the halacha is like Rabbi Shimon. So as much as we usually don't paskin like Rabbi Shimon, certainly when he argues with his greats about plukta Rabbi Yehuda, but on Shabbos, there it's different, and there the halacha really is like Rav Shimon. So okay, what we need to know is that when it comes to muktzah, Rabbi Yehuda is the machmer, and Reb Shimon is the mekel. Now, the sugya of muktzah is a very complicated sugya, and you can learn it in 6 months in yeshiva, and it's still going to be a complicated sugya. And although the Gemara is going to delve in a little bit into the sugya of muktzah now, we're going to keep it high level. So again, the super duper high level is Rabbi Yehuda is a machmer muktzah, Reb Shimon's mekel. As it relates to applications of where Rabbi Yehuda is machmer, so that will manifest itself during the course of the daf. But either way, Rab Abba, who is taking the first attempt to explain what the Chavrayim meant when they said that when Rav learned up in the Mishnah that Asura B'Achila L'Yoyma, he was going to leave it to Rabbi Yehuda, it's Rabbi Yehuda V'Achano D'Tnan. We learned in a Mishnah, Mechatchen Es Adilun L'Fnei Behema. A person is allowed to take gourd and chop it up on Shabbos and feed it to a behemoth. Additionally, in the event that somebody has an avela and he wants to feed his dogs on Shabbos, you're allowed to chop up the nevela and you're allowed to feed it to the dogs. Rabbi Yehuda says, in the event that this nevela was not a nevela before Shabbos, meaning in the event that the animal died on Shabbos, asur, it's going to be asur, because when Shabbos came, it wasn't a nevela, which means it was not muchan to be fed to klavim. As a result, it's muktzah. Therefore, Rabbi Yehuda, who's a machmer muktzah, says that it's not going to be okay. So according to the Tana Kama, an avela is an avela is an avela, and you're always allowed to take an avela, cut it up, and feed it to the dogs. I don't care if it was an avela before Shabbos or if it became an avela on Shabbos. According to Rabbi Yehuda, it matters. If it became an avela on Shabbos, being that it wasn't muchan far Shabbos for the klavim, right? It was a good animal. What were you going to do with it? I don't know. Let it work in the field, or at some point shecht it and eat it. But achilas klavim is always the last option when you can't eat it. So like kelev tashlich anoisai. So in a situation like that, being that it wasn't mucham leklavim, therefore it's going to be awesome. But what do you see from him? Alma said, Rabbi Kimitoli itchen me'asmal asura. Being that it wasn't prepared from before Shabbos for the klavim, it's inam and amuchan. It's going to be awesome. So Hachanami said, Rabbi, it makes sense that if somebody would shecht on Shabbos, it would be also to eat on Shabbos, because Kimitoli itchen me'asmal. Being that the shechita happened not before Shabbos, it happened on Shabbos. Asura, it's going to be awesome. And you want to know why it's also it's muktzah. So said Rabbi that you know why Asur B'Achila L'Yoyma, and you know which Rabbi Yehuda this is based on. It's based on Rabbi Yehuda, who's Machmer Muktzah. He holds that in order to eat something, it has to be muchen. There's no way this basa was muchen, because when Ben Hashmashas Erev Shabbos came, when the laws of Muktzah go into effect, at that point it was a live animal. So clearly it wasn't prepared to be on your Shabbos dinner menu. So based on that, in the event that the shechita happened, even though shechita sheira, that's a sugi in Hilchos Chulin. But you want to know, as it relates to Hilchos Shabbos, it's going to be muktzah. This is what Rabbi Abba said. Amalei Abayis. Abayi told Rabbi Abba. He said, "Mi dami, it's not a tzushta. Hasam, as it relates to the halacha of nevela leklavim, where Rabbi Yehuda says, "Am leihosin nevela me'erev Shabbos asura," there, the reason it's considered enim and amuchin is because meikar muchin la'adam. Because before Shabbos, this animal was muchin la'adam, v'hashta muchin la'klavim. And now it became muchin la'klavim. It was not muchin la'klavim. It was muchin la'adam. As a result, it's enim and amuchin, it's a muktzah problem. But hacha, as it relates to this animal, meikar muchin la'adam, v'hashta muchin la'adam. It was always muchin la'adam. You want to know if it was shachot already, it was marinating and pickling? No. But at the same time, it was definitely achilas adam, and now you're using it l'achilas adam. So it was muchan la'adam, and it's weiter muchan la'adam. So if that's the case, Tainit Abaya, I don't think it's a tushtal. Meaning, high level, conceptually, I have what you're trying to say. Rabbi Yehuda holds it has to be muchan. But I think in this case it is muchan. Davka over there it's not muchan, because it was muchan l'achilas adam, and now you want to use l'achilas klavim, but over here it was muchan l'achilas adam. You're right using l'achilas adam. Says the Gemara. So Rabbi Abba responded to Abaya. He told him, when the animal's alive, it's muchan la'achila? No, when an animal is alive, it's muchan legadol. It's meant to be used in the field, right? An animal is more valuable alive than it is dead, because when it's alive, there's more options, there's more things you can do with it. And being that it's considered muchan legadol, not muchan la'achila, so it actually is like the nevela leklavim, where it was muchan le'adam or legadol, and now all of a sudden it's being muchan leklavim. The bottom line is, it's taka eina min hamuchan in this case as well. So Rabbi Abba said, I believe for sure that according to Rabbi Yehuda, that eina min hamuchan is going to be a problem. Well, based on that, that, it would be asur l'yoyma. But the Gemara said, Ihachi, oibazoi, Abaye responded to Rabba, if you're going to tell me that every animal that is alive is considered muchan legadol, and it's not considered muchan lachila, and that's why hashoichet b'Shabbos, even though shchitas is ksher, but there's still a muksa problem. Well, if that's the case, behema the Rabbi Yehuda b'yontif heichi shachtinon. So why are you ever allowed to shecht an animal on yontif? On yontif, you're allowed to shecht. It's not considered chilul yontif because ein bein Shabbos liyontif ella. The problem is the laws of muktzah, just like they apply on Shabbos, apply on Yontif. And if that's the case, you should never be allowed to shecht on Yontif, because you should always say in Rabbi Yehuda's world it was eina min hamuchan. That says bishleim, if you're going to tell me that animal is considered muchan le'adam, so it always is muchan. There's not going to be a problem. But if you're telling me that it's not muchan le'adam, but rather what it is, it's muchan le'gadol. If it's muchan le'gadol, just like that's a problem on Shabbos in the obscure case of Asheichet b'Shabbos, well, in the more common case where lechatchila you're allowed to go ahead and shecht on Yontif, this should end up being an issue as well. Rabba told him, no, let me explain to you how this works. An animal that's alive is a medes la'achila and a medes legadol. It's actually a medes for both. It's a medes to be eaten and it's a medes legadol. On Yontif you're allowed to shecht, right? So nishchata, when you go ahead and you shechted, huvra de la'achila a medes. You're being mevarer right now that what was it really muchan for? It was muchan achila. Lo nishchata, if you didn't shecht it, then hover the legadolei medes. Then it's going to be inspired that it was legadolei medes. And that's why you're allowed to shecht on Yontif. On Shabbos, however, once Bein Hashmashas comes, at that point, it's for sure only muchan legadol. The reason it's only muchan legadol because you don't have the option to be able to go ahead and shecht on Shabbos because that's going to be aser. In other words, Rabbi Abba said, well, I'll tell you that the Rabbi Yehuda that the Chavraya meant when they said Asheichet b'Shabbos, even though Shchitas is ksheretz asur b'achila l'yoyma, was the Rabbi Yehuda of Muchan. And the reason is because there's a muktzah problem. It's eina min hamuchan. Why is it eina min hamuchan? Because the behemah b'chayel is a medes legadol, as opposed to now, where it's oimedes lachila. So, being that it was never muchan lachila, it was muchan legadol, it's for that reason there's going to be an issue. What's your kasha? Your kasha is, if that's the case, yontif teichiach. So why yontif is it fine? So you have to tweak a little bit what I'm saying. What I meant to say is that an animal that's alive is always muchan for both. And as long as I have both options, I see it as being muchan for both, and when I do one or the other, igloy milsal mafreya, based on the sugya, as we'll see in 1 second, a prayer, that determines which was which. But on Shabbos, leading up to Shabbos, it's muchan for both. But the minute Bein Hashmashas comes, the minute I'm no longer allowed to shecht, well, at that point you lose the option of achila. Now all it is muchan legadol. If all it is muchan legadol, so kum tois, it was eina min hamuchan, and that's the Rabbi Yehuda. So Abaye is going to fire back now. The basis of what Abaye is going to say back now is, essentially, in order for you to make this Rabbi Yehuda work, you need to suggest Rabbi Yehuda holds yesh breyer, right? Because essentially what you're saying is that an animal is not muchan la'achila, it's muchan la'achila and legada, right? Because if it's muchan la'achila, then there's no problem of Asheichet b'Shabbos eating it on that day. It was always muchan la'achila. The teretz is it's always muchan la'achila and legadol. On Shabbos you lose the option of achila. On Yontif you have both options, and with breyer it's going to work. So really, in order for you to make this work, you have to hold yesh breyer, right? Let's say this a little better, because if you hold ein breyer, well then there's no such thing as saying that the animal was muchan legadol, it was muchan la'achila, and on Yontif we figured out which one it's going to be. You would have to say from the fact that you're allowed to shecht on Yontif, it was always considered muchan la'adam. And if that's the case on Shabbos, it would also always be considered muchan la'adam. It's bechefza muchan la'adam. And if it's bechefza muchan la'adam, then there's no reason that there should be a tzushel to Rabbi Yehuda and our sugya. And it can't be that the Chavraya Kedisha, when they said Rabbi Yehudi, they were referring to this Rabbi Yehuda. So the only way, if you're holding cheshbon, that Reb Abba's teretz can work is if you say that an animal is not inherently muchan la'adam, it's muchan legadol ula adam. On Shabbos, you lose the option of adam. That's why there's a problem, right? That's what you're suggesting, as opposed to on Yontif, where both options are available with the Indian of prayer record. but it's only true if you hold Yesh Breira. Says the Gemara. Abaya turned to Rabba and he told him, Rabbi Yehuda Breira. I know for a fact Rabbi Yehuda doesn't hold Breira. And if he doesn't hold Breira, the whole binyan falls minala. And so the Gemara says, how do you know that Rabbi Yehuda doesn't hold Breira? So again, this is a fun daf, as we can already tell from the beginning. The Gemara here is going to stelzu two of the greatest sugis in Breira, both of which relate to Rabbi Yehuda. That's why these are the two we're picking. Right? Whenever you learn Breira, so there's always a handful of sugyas that get thrown around. In this sugya, the reason we're picking these two cases is because these are the Rabbi Yehuda cases. And we want to know Shitas Rabbi Yehuda. But either way, says the Gemara, we know Rabbi Yehuda doesn't know Breira. How do you know that? So every time you see this halacha brought down, there's always a shaila in the garrison. Is it Tanya or is it Tanan? And the reason is because really it's a Mishnah and a Brisa. So the Mishnah says it in one nusach, the Brisa says it in another nusach. That's why there's always a little bit of a sugya. Is what we're about to learn now a Tanya or is it a Tanan? But either way, in the Gemara it says the Tanya. So we'll go with the Tanya. Somebody buys wine from Kuti. We know who the Kutis are by Chulin Daf Yodalit. All we need to know for our sugya now is that the Kutim were chashud when it came to Trumas and Maasros. Okay, so if somebody buys wine from a Kuti and he has to be mafresh Trumas and Maasros because he knows that they're chashud. Okay, so just be mafresh Trumas and Maasros. So Rashi has two mahalchim here in terms of what the issue was. One issue was he had no keli to put the Trumas and Maasros in. That's a problem. Can't be mafresh Trumas Hamaisos if you don't have where to put the Trumas Hamaisos. Additionally, the issue wasn't the keli, but the issue was that it was almost Shabbos. And because it was almost Shabbos, on Shabbos you're not allowed to be mafresh Trumas Hamaisos, so you didn't have a chance to go ahead and get the keli and put everything in order. You just had to act very, very quickly. The sun is literally setting as this is all going down. But either way, and you're not in a situation right now where you can properly be mafresh Trumas Hamaisos. So there's a plan B. Omer he could say, Shnei lugin shani asad lahafresh harei hein truma. The two lugin that I'm going to be mafresh are going to be truma. Why two lugin? So Rashi says because it's talking about where there was 100 lug, and 2 out of 100 is 1 out of 50, and the Mishnah says that midas beininus when it comes to afrashas truma, even though chita chas beteres sakri, but the midas beininus is to do 150. But anyway, the shnei lugin shani also afresh rein truma asara, the 10 that I'm going to be mafresh after that, it's a little bit less than 10, right? What is it? It's 9.8. Because once you take off 2, you're left with 98. So it's 10% of 98. Ma'aser is going to be Ma'aser Rishon. Tisha, the 9, or whatever the real number is after that, Ma'aser Sheni is going to be Ma'aser Sheni. Umeichel, and then you have to be Mechalel the Ma'aser Sheni. V'shoysim meyad, you're allowed to drink Divrei Rameir, Azoi Halt Rameir. So Rameir says that even though right now you have no ability to be Mafresh Shumas Ma'aser, it's fine. Don't worry about it. What you could do is you could just designate, the 2 that I'm going to be mafresh, the 1 or the 9, the whatever that I'm going to, the 10, that's going to be the Trumas Hamaisos, and that in of itself is going to be okay. Now this is a fantastic chiddush because right now you aren't mafresh anything. So right now when you eat, I don't know, maybe eating truma, maybe eating Ma'aser Rishon, maybe eating something you're not supposed to eat. No, the Teretz says later when I'm going to be mafresh, it's going to be gloy muslim, I'm afraid that what I'm eating now was not the truma, right? And as a result, it's not going to be an issue. Says Rameir, that's fine. You could do that. You can work with this retroactive. It's because Rameir's shita is yesh breira. By the way, why do you have to be mechalel the Ma'aser Sheni? You're relying on breira for truma. You're relying on breira for Ma'aser Rishon. There's no chilul over there. Ma'aser Sheni, be mechalel. It's because Rameir holds as much as you can rely on breira, it's a b'diavad. If there's another way to do this, then I'd rather you work the other way. You're not allowed to eat Ma'aser Sheni outside of Yerushalayim. So if there's an option to be mechal the Ma'aser Sheni, then be mechal the Ma'aser Sheni. So a mayor allows you to do breira, but there's an insight. He only allows you to do it if you have no choice. It's you bought yayin from the kuti, right? Even the whole case sets itself up that way, where it's you don't have keli or it's ben hashmashes. But the point is that you can use it avifo, you can use it, but that's only shitas Rameir. Rabbi Yehuda, that's what we need. V'Rab Yosi, V'Rab Shimon Oisrin. These 3 Tanoim held that it's aser. So why did they hold it's aser? Presumably because they held ein breira. But what's the bottom line? You see clearly that Shitas Rab Yehuda is ein breira. Abai told Rabbi, your whole shtickle Torah is all predicated on the fact yesh breira. Rabbi Yehuda doesn't hold a breira. You know, I know that from the This is the most famous case of breira. From Alikeach Yaimi Ben Akuti, from Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yosi, Rab Shimon Oisrin. You see clearly Rabbi Yehuda does not have the opinion of breira. But the Gemara says, no, Hasan Tani Taima. That has nothing to do with breira. As a matter of fact, it's mefurish over there in the discussion that Rabbi Yosi, Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Shimon had with Rameir, that the reason they argued with Rameir was not related to breira. Rather, it's based on the reason that they themselves expressed. They told Rameh, aren't you worried that maybe the noid, this jug that has all this wine or whatever's inside of it, is going to break? And if that happens, it's going to come at the Lamafreya. Because if you don't end up being mafresh, Trumas and Isers, then for sure it's going to come at the Lamafreya, there's going to be a problem. Rameh told him, I hear, look at yeah, when it happens, it happens. And by the way, this is a very broadly applied machlokes, where Rameh is not chayish shemi yibaka hanoid, right? Rameh is chayish shemi yuta, but he's not chayish shemi yibaka hanoid, as opposed to Rameh is bali plukta over here are chayish shemi yibaka hanoid. But either way, this has nothing to do with breira. It's true, Rameh holds yesh breira, but it could be Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yisrael, Rabbi Shimon also hold yesh breira, and the only reason they were oiser was because of achshash ba'alma shemi yibaka hanoid. The bottom line is there's no raya from here that Rabbi Yehuda doesn't hold the breira. So the Gemara says, "Hello, Abaye said, I hear tape 2, miditani ayoy." You know, I know Rabbi Yehuda doesn't hold a prayer. I know it from something that Ayoy said, and Ayoy is mentioned in Mesechtes Erevin, Daf Lamed Vav and Daf Lamed Zayin. That's one of the sugis of Breira, and that's where the world of Breira intersects with the laws of Erevin, specifically Eruvit Chumen. So the background is as follows. The Mishnah there says that Masna Adam Al Eruvai, a person can make an Erev Ala Tanai. What does that mean? And the Mishnah goes on and expresses 2 cases. One case is where a person heard that there's a chacham that's coming to town, but he doesn't know if he's coming to the east of the town, to the west of the town. Now, he's outside the Tchum. So, in order for him to go, whether it's east or west, he's going to have to make an Erev Tchumen. Problem is, you can't make an Erev Tchumen on both sides. You can only make an Erev Tchumen on one side, right? Because once you make an Erev Tchumen, so now your center of the universe becomes where the Erev is, and you lose out on your ability to walk in the opposite direction of where the Erev is. But the bottom line is, he doesn't know which direction the Chacham is coming. So he could be Masna. He could put an Erev to the east, he could put an Erev to the west, and he could say, if the Chacham goes to the east, I want my Erev to the east to be the Erev. And if he goes to the west, I want it to be to the west. The Mishnah continues. The Mishnah says, I'll tell you a similar halacha. This is very much me'inyan le'inyan ba'isa inyan. What would be if there were 2 chachamim that were coming to town? There's a chacham coming to the east and there's a chacham that's coming to the west. And he's not sure yet in the beginning of Shabbos which chacham's drasha he wants to hear. Right? He wants to hear the East Coast Mahalach or the West Cost Mahalach. So he says, you know what, I'm leaving my options open over the course of Shabbos and I'm going to decide as it gets a little bit later. You can do that. So you can make 2 Eruvin, decide on Shabbos which one you wanted should work, and it's going to be okay. On this Mishnah, Zok the Gemara, Abraisa, Toni Ayoy. Ayoy was the name of a Chacham, and he sold the following Braisa. Rabbi Yehuda said, a person cannot be masna on 2 things at once. Ela im bachacham lemizrach, ruve lemizrach, lemayrav ruve lemayrav, ve'ilu lekanu lekanu loy. Now, the way Rashi explains this is Ayoy said that Rabbi Yehuda agreed with the first of the 2 halachas. He just disagreed with the second of the 2 halachas. The first halacha, where he said that if the Chacham goes to the east, I want my Erev to be to the east. If he goes to the west, I want it to be to the west. That Rabbi Yehuda said I'm okay with. Azasor Tanai is fine. And the Erev will end up being in the direction that the Chacham ended up going. If, however, there's 2 Chachamim, and you're deciding on Shabbos where I'm going to go, in that case, it's not going to be okay. And the Bnei Yeshiva, when they heard what Ayoy said, they didn't understand. Why did Ayoy say that Rabbi Yehuda was masking to the first halacha, he was cheluk with the second halacha? Why would he not agree with the second halacha? The Ein Breira. It's obviously because of Ein Breira. What do you mean Ein Breira? Because there's 2 Chachamim that are coming. You're not sure which one of the 2 Chachamim you want to hear. When you decide which one you want to hear, it's going to have to retroactively say that was there. Again, the Erev goes into effect, Ben Hashmoshes, it goes into effect as Shabbos is being ushered in. You're deciding which of the 2 Eruvim should be ushered in Bein Hashmoshes on Shabbos, which means you're doing Elam Afreya, which is Breira 101. But obviously, Rabbi Yehuda is less Slay Breira, and that must be why Rabbi Yehuda was Chaylik in the second case. Well, if that's true, Mizrachu Ma'irav Nami Breira. The first case is also a problem of Breira. Why? So this is a little nuance. It's because the Maksha, the Vahavinam, the Bnei Yeshiva were of the opinion that the case was where the Chacham himself on Shabbos was going to make up his mind. Do I want to go to the east or do I want to go to the west? So if that's the case, really on Shabbos, again, even in the first case, it's being a goy Muslim afraid which one of these two Eruvin were going to be the right Eruv, which again is totally a Breira. So if Rabbi Yehuda holds Ein Breira, and that's why he disagrees with the second case, Ein Breira should disagree with the first case as well. V'amar Rabbi Yochanan answered the Bnei Yeshiva's kasha. He told him, no, you didn't understand the first case. The first case is not where the Chacham is coming on Shabbos. Ukvar b'chacham. He came already before Shabbos. It's just that the guy who's making the Eruv, the Masna, doesn't know where he came. I don't know if he came this way, came that way. But here's the point. Whichever direction he came in, that's the Eruv that's being chal now, not on Shabbos l'mafreya now. Now. Not mikanu l'abal l'mafreya. Now. And being that it's happening right now, has nothing to do with the Sugya Breira. But the bottom line is, what do you see from here? This is the end of this conversation. You see from here, we just need one nuance. What we need is that Rabbi Yehuda is less lebreira. You know it? Midetani ayoy. So Abaye told Rabbi Abba that the only way your pshat in what Rav meant when he said Hasheichet b'Shabbos shchitasek sheir barasur b'achila liyoyma and v'nosvin chavraya l'meima Rabbi Yehuda is which Rabbi Yehuda? Rabbi Yehuda holds that you can't be mechatech a nevela lefnei aklovim in the event that the nevela became a nevela on Shabbos. And the reason is because it wasn't muchan, and if that's the case, Rabbi Abba said, I think we have a very good sushtal over here. Hashoichet b'Shabbos, the animal wasn't muchan b'tchila Shabbos lachilas adam, and if that's the case, this is no different than the animal that died on Shabbos that you can't give the dogs. Over here, the animal was shachad, didn't die, it was shachad, but the same you can't feed the people, because the reason is, it was enam and amuchan. It can't be that that's true. Because the only way you can make that work is if Rabbi Yehuda holds Yesh Breira. Shaykhis, what does that have to do with Breira? Because if you're going to tell me that an animal while it's alive is not muchan la'achilas adam, 100%, full stop, well then you're going to have a problem every single yontif. Yontif you're allowed to shech l'chatchila. And if it's not muchan la'achilas adam, you shouldn't be able to shech. What was Rabbi Abba's eitzah? Rabbi Abba's eitzah was no. An animal is muchan achilas adam, it's also muchan legadal. On Yontif, when you shecht it, igloy milso lachilas adam. On Shabbos, where you're not allowed to shecht it, so obviously it's always going to end up being an issue. That would work if Rabbi Yehuda held Yesh Breira. The problem is we know from Ayah that Rabbi Yehuda holds Ein Breira. If he holds Ein Breira, the way it works on Yontif has to be, because it's 100%, Muchan lachilas adam. So if it's 100% muchan lachilas adam, you don't necessarily want to shecht it. Whatever, we can figure out why that's the way it is. But does state that it's considered muchan lachilas adam. You know that from the fact you're allowed to shecht on yontif, despite the fact they're in bread. So must be it's muchan lachilas adam. Well, then if that's the case, it shouldn't be any different on Shabbos, right? Why would Shabbos be different? Because Shabbos you don't have the option to shecht. Yontif you have the That's not the point. The yontif, you don't have to shecht. The teretz is muchan achilas adam because it's darkei to ultimately shecht. That's what you do with animals. With animals, at some point you shecht it. You don't necessarily shecht it. But in hilchas muchan, it's considered muchan achilas adam. And if that's true on yontif, it'd have to be true on Shabbos. It's becheft to consider muchan adam. That's the case. This Rabbi Yehuda is not a zushtel. We're back to the drawing board. The nosvin chavrai l'meimer Rabbi Yehuda. The big question is, hi Rabbi Yehuda, Elam Rabbi Yosef. So Rabbi Yosef took the second crack at it. He said, Rabbi Yehuda de Kalim here. You want to know which Rabbi Yehuda is? It's Rabbi Yehuda of Kalim. And this is a sugya, a Mishnah, Masech Shabbos, Tav Kuf Chav Daled. And this also deals with the laws of Muktzah. Again, being mindful of the fact that without getting into the sugyas of Muchan, Rabbi Yehuda is a Machmer Muchan. We're going to find another case where Rabbi Yehuda is Islay Muktzah Muchan, and we're going to try to tell it to our Mishnah. Kol HaKelim Talmud Shabbos says the Mishnah. Any Keli that you're allowed to carry on Shabbos, Shivreyem Nitalim. In the event that the Keli breaks on Shabbos, you're allowed to carry the shards, the broken parts of the keli as well. So just because the keli breaks doesn't make it muktzah. Ubavad, you have to read the not such fine print. This is only true you oisen me'in malacha. It's only if the shivrei kelim are able to do malacha. I mean, if you can't do anything with it, if there's no hishtamshus that you can have with it, then obviously you have not touch it, right? It's muktzah. I was going to say get rid of it. No, you don't touch it. But if you can't do malacha with it, then not. So, for example, shivrei areva, if somebody has some sort of basket and now it broke, lechasis ben pi chavis. As long as you can do something with it, as long as you can cover a chavis, even though that's not what that areva was used for, right? That areva literally is a mixing bowl, and now you're using it to cover a chavis, but you can use it. As long as you use it, it's going to be okay. Shivrei schuches, if you had a glass crystal keli that broke, lechas ben pi apach, if you can cover the top of a pach, a jug, that's going to be fine. Rabbi Yehuda says, I'm a machmer. This is a nuance, me'in malachton. You have to be able to continue to do this specific malacha. So, for example, shivrei areva lotznot l'toicha mikvah. An areva is used to put something in it. So, as long as it's big enough and it's shaped in a way where you can pour a mikvah, you can pour some oichel into it. So then it's going to be okay. Or shivrei schuches, which was used to contain liquids inside of it. Lotzok l'toicha shemen. You'd have to be able to pour shemen inside of it. But here's the point. Rabbi Yehuda's machmer. What's Rabbi Yehuda's point? That it's not enough that you could do me'in malacha, but it has to be me'in malachton. That says me'in malachton in me'in malacha acheres loy. The only time shivrei kelim you're allowed to use is if you can do it me'in malachton. Okay, what's the point? Alma, what do you see from here? Kivan dolei itchin me'esmol lahai malach asiri. You know what you see from here? You see from here the Rabbi Yehuda holds if you have a keli that was mucha me'erev Shabbos to be used on Shabbos, but it was muchan for this ishtamshus. If you want to use it for a different ishtamshus, it would require some sort of tikkun. You would have to do something. You'd have to break it in this case. But there's some tikkun that would have to happen. That makes it be einoi min muchan. Again, even though high level this is muchan, this keli is muchan. It's muchan. It's on my dining room table. I'm using it, mamish, this tchina inside of it. I'm using it. Yeah, that's fine. But if you want to now use it for something else, if you needed a tikkun to be able to use it for that, well, that in and of itself won't be okay. Says Rav Yosef, if that's the case, here's the tzushtal. As it relates to an animal, even if an animal is muchan la'adam, like we proved already from Amud Aleph, even though an animal is muchan la'adam, but at the same time, being that if you're going to want to eat from the animal, you're still going to have to do a shchita. So it requires a tikkun. So it can't be any better than the shivrei kelim, where the keli was for sure mucha, but at the same time it required a tikkun. What was the tikkun? It required a shvira. So here too it requires a shchita. Well, if that's the case, being that it wasn't prepared mamish for this thing yesterday, asura, it's going to be asur. Either way, so Rabbi Yosef said, you want to know which Rabbi Yehuda I think the Chavraya Kedisha were referring to when they said, according to Rabbi Yehuda, it's going to be asur liyoyma, it's going to be muktzah. Where do you see that Rabbi Yehuda holds? It's going to be muktzah. You see, Rabbi Yehuda holds that when it comes to muktzah, it has to be muchan, mamish for this thing, and if it's chaser any tikkun, that in and of itself is going to be an issue. Well, if that's the case, over here it's chaser tikkun, and based on that, this would be a problem. So who said this teretz? Rav Yosef said this teretz. Amalei Abaya. So Abaya told him. Now, by the way, Abaya was the one who said what he said to Rab Abba on Amud Aleph as well. But when Abaya says something to Rab Abba, it doesn't have the same meaning in our Chabura anyways, as when Abaya says something to Rav Yosef. But either way, Amalei Abaya, he told him, Midami, it's not a tzushtal. I think you're misreading this whole Rabbi Yehuda. The aside of this Rabbi Yehuda, of why when a keli breaks, it has to be me'in malachton, otherwise it's not going to be okay. It's not because of Rabbi Yehuda's definition of muktzah that it has to be muchen for this thing and not be chaser, even a tikkun kol shehu. That's not the nakuda. If you want to know muchan, not muchan, if high level it's considered muchan, that in and of itself is going to be okay. Doesn't have to be muchan on such a granular level. Okay, so what's pshat in Rabbi Yehuda? Why does he hold that it has to be me'in malachton? It's a whole different nakuda. He says, Hassam, in that case, me'ikara keli. When you started off on Shabbos with a keli, then the keli broke on Shabbos. So betchilas HaShabbos, that's me'ikara, it was a keli. V'hashta, and now that it broke, shever kli. Now it's already a broken shard. V'havale noilad. It's noilad. Now, noilad is a sif cotton in the worlds of muktzah, but it's not the same thing, right? Noilad is the first thing you mesachtes beya. But the bottom line is, it's noilad. This is like a davar chadash over here. V'asra, and it's that For that reason, it's going to be aser. If, however, you can use me'in malachton, right? So with here, Rabbi Yehuda doesn't hold it's noilad, and being that it's not noilad, in that case, it's going to be fine. But here's the point: that Rabbi Yehuda is being mechadish noilad. Okay, so maybe in our sugya there should be a noilad problem, right? Had Abaya answer anything? He just shifted the nusach a little bit, but. Sheikhet b'Shabbos, you started off with an animal, now you have a piece of meat. So said Abaya, here's the punchline. But Hochar, as it relates to food, meikara uchla. Before you shechted the animal, it was considered oichel, u'besoif oichel. And now that you shechted it, it's weiter oichel. In fact, uchla deifrisu. When you shechted it, you know what you did? You just chopped a piece of meat. That's essentially what you did. Rashi says, ifris means nishbar benifrash. It's basically like you chopped off a piece of meat. And being that all it is that you chopped off a piece of meat, it's not noilad, it's not going to be a problem. And Abaye continued, he says, maybe mechatesi. How do you know if you chop off a piece of meat, that's not considered noilad? That sounds like noilad to me. You started off with a bull, and now all of a sudden you have a piece of meat, right? No, immediately, Rabbi Yehuda dam uchel defros, shaper dami, said, Abaye, I have information. I know for a fact that Rabbi Yehuda holds of this svara of uchel deifris, and it's not considered of a noilad. How do I know that? The time from the Mishnah Masechta Shabbos, ain't tzeichton. You're not allowed to squeeze Paris, right? Schita on Shabbos, if you want to remove mashkin from it. If they came out by themselves, Asurun, it's going to be awesome. Rabbi Yehuda said, in the event that these Paris were meant for oichlin, hayotzim mutter, then whatever comes from it is going to be mutter. Ve'im lemashkin, and if you're using it lemashkin, then hayotzim mehen aser, then it's going to be aser. The side of Shitas Rabbi Yehuda is, Rabbi Yehuda holds that if you're using it la'achila, so then there's no chash that you're going to go ahead and lechatchila do schita. If, however, it's set aside for mashkin, then there's a chash you're going to do schita. So again, you're not do schita on Shabbos lechatchila. That's obvious. The question is, what if it was yotzim meyatzim? Chachamim say it's going to be yotzim. Rabbi Yehuda says, I think you're being machmir yotzim midai. Over here, Rabbi Yehuda is the mekel. Rabbi Yehuda says that if it was Peiros that was set aside for mashkin, meaning what was the objective of these peiros? To do a schita. So if the objective was to do a schita, there I'm concerned that if we're going to allow you to use a b'diavad, you may go ahead and use a lechatchila, so therefore I'm shutting it down. I'm saying that if it's yatzim yatzman, it's going to be awesome. If, however, it was something that was set aside lechila, then I'm not concerned, and as a result, it's going to be okay. But one thing you see from here, Rabbi Yehuda says that if the schitas peiros happen on Shabbos, it's mutter. Only if it was a medas la'achila, whatever. Not learning the nuances of the sugya of schita. We're learning muktzah now. So what we need to know is just one thing. Rabbi Yehuda is not impressed with the fact that meikara pri v'hashta mashka. What should be the issue? Noilad elamai. You have to say because uchla deifrisu, hachanami uchla deifrisu. But the bottom line is the second attempt to try to shtel to a Rabbi Yehuda in the sugyas of muktzah was that you see that Rabbi Yehuda holds that in the world of muchan has to be muchan mamish. What's the makar to this? A keli breaks unless it can be used me'im malachta. But it's melach acheres, even though the keli was muchan. Yeah, but it was muchan for this, it wasn't muchan for that. That's going to be a problem. So that's like a tzushtal that you see from it, that whenever it's chaser tikkun, even though it's be'etzim muchan, but the end of itself is not going to be okay. But after further review, I'm like, Abai, that's not Pshat and Rabbi Yehuda. It's a nice shtickle Torah. If that was Pshat and Rabbi Yehuda, it's an amazing shtickle Torah. By the way, if you want to see that sushtel, that's a little bit of a hard sush. You want to see the sush a little bit better, I'm Berajba. Rajba says, I don't know what the sushtel of the Gemara is. He says sort of what we said. But the bottom line is, I should say, we're saying sort of what the Heilige Rajba says. But the bottom line is that the point is that Rabbi Yehuda is related to something else, related to Noilad. And if it's related to Noilad, it's no shaykhis to our sugya, because we're dealing with Eichel. And even though the Eichel took on a completely different form, there's something called Uchla de Ifris. There's a present Rabbi Yehuda Shita's Uchla de Ifris. The bottom line is, we're 0 for 2 right now. We shtelzu 2 Rabbi Yehudas, both in the sugya of Muktzah, both Mishnayos and Masechta Shabbos, and so far we've been unsuccessful. Says the Gemara, Lav Itmer Allah. Now, the words Lav Itmer Allah is a little tricky, right? Because it doesn't look like this is a third teretz. It looks like Lav Itmer Allah is all part of the original cheshbon, right? You would expect to see an Ella, right? That's not what the Gemara is doing. And the reason is because this third teretz really is noilad, pun intended, from the previous and the aforementioned discussion. As a matter of fact, it sounds like Rabbi Yosef is probably the one that's saying it, because El Amar Rabbi Yosef, and Rabbi Yosef and Abaya are going back and forth over here. But once we stelzu this sugya, I think in the sugya of schita, there is a source, there is a makar, another Rabbi Yehuda would be able to stelzu. What is that? Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel, Moida hay Rabbi Yehuda lechachamim. Rabbi Yehuda was moida to the chachamim, besalis, esim v'anovim. If somebody has baskets of esim v'anovim, that what? In that case, the halacha is that even though the Zeisim and Anovim are technically what? Are technically muchan la'achila, but any mashkin that comes out of it, in that case, Rabbi Yehuda's moed to the chachamim, it's going to be okay. It's going to be a problem. What do you see from here? Alma, you see from here, kivan de l'schita kaimi. Being that Zeisim and Anovim are very valuable things. The mashka that comes out of the zayis, the oil, is more valuable than the zayis. The mashka that comes out of the grapes, the wine, is more valuable than the grapes. When you have something like that, yov daite, there's always a halacha that says that in that situation, it could be the person will ultimately want it lemashkin as well because of the chashav nature of it, and based on that, even though you had it set aside lo'ichlin, but in that case, Rabbi Yehuda, it's going to be also. Again, where it's lamashkin, gzeir Shem yischait. Where it's lo'ichlin, there's no gzeir Shem yischait. When it comes to anavim and zeisim, even where it's lo'ichlin, gzeir Shem yischait. Right? Okay. But what's the point? The point is, you see, when something is l'schita kaimi yov daite, because ultimately you're going to be soichet this. Or there's a good chance you're going to be soichet this because of its chashivas. Well, hachanami over here, you have to say, as it relates to a behema, kimin de l'shchita kaima, being that at some point you're going to want to shech the animal, because of the fact, right? Now you maybe don't want to shecht it, but at some point you're going to shecht it. Yov daite, at that point you're going to. Therefore, we look at you right now as if it being something that there's a concern that you might shecht. And here's the punchline. It's for that reason it's going to be asal yoma. In other words, the reason it's going to be asal yoma, says the Gemara in the third attempt, is taken not because of muktzah. I didn't do a muktzah. It's not muktzah, it's not noilad. It's simply because you see that there's a gzeira shema yischait. Where do you see it? You see it in Rabbi Yehuda's world. Where did Rabbi Yehuda say? Rabbi Yehuda says usually something that's muchan la'oichlin I'm not worried about. But when it comes to zeisim anovim, on some level you always view it as muchan la'mashkin. And therefore there's always a gzeira shema yischait. Well, if that's true for zeisim anovim, it has to be true for Behem also. The relationship between tzchita and zeisim and anovim is the same as the relationship between shchita and a live animal. And if there's a shash that if we're going to allow you to take the mashkin hayotzim me'elav of zeisim v'anovim, that may cause you lechatchilu to go ahead and do a shchita, then there has to be a shash that if we're going to allow you to go ahead and eat the meat of an animal, there should be gzeira shema yishchait. And that's the reason it's going to be asal yoma, gzeira shema yishchait. That's the third shot. Not because of muktzah, not because of noilad, but simply because of a gzeira shema yishchait. But the Gemara says it doesn't work. You know why this doesn't work? It says the Gemara, because midi hu taima el Rav. Because who is the one that said that our Mishnah is going alibi to Rabbi Yehuda? It was the Nasfin Chavraya who were coming to explain Rav. Rav was the one that said Asur Bachila Liyomis. This is all in the world. This is in Rav's Bismedrash, right? Who's the Chavraya? It's Rav's Bismedrash. That's who is discussing this halacha. And Ha'amar Rav said, Chalakai Rabbi Yehuda Afilu B'Salei Zeisav Anovim. It's Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel that said the halacha. It wasn't Rav, right? Rabbi Yehuda himself never said he's moed b'zeisav anovim. Shmuel said that Rabbi Yehuda was moed b'zeisav anovim. What about Rav? Fakert. Cholukaya Rabbi Yehuda afilu b'salei zeisav anovim. So you see, in Rav's world, there's no gzeira shema yischait. And if that's the case, there should be no gzeira shema yishchait. And if that's the case, this can't be the tzushal. Rav Sheshes Brei Rav Idi. So Rav Sheshes Brei Rav Idi said, I'll take the fourth and final attempt of today's snaf. Rabbi Yehuda Dineris. You want to know which Rabbi Yehuda? It's Rabbi Yehuda Dineris. And this is going to now circle back to the Los HaMuktzah. We're going to the Brayso, metaltal ner chodesh. A person is allowed to be metaltal and ner chodesh. Now this ner that we're talking about over here, Rashi says, is a ner that was made up of earthenware. What's unique about a ner shel cheres, a ner that's made of earthenware, is that it gets very dirty and greasy, right? It's something that's very, very maos. So the Brisa says you're allowed to be metaltal, a brand new ner chadash, avalo yasha, not one that was used already. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Azai halt Rabbi Yehuda. What's the aside of Rabbi Yehuda? Rabbi Yehuda holds that it's muktzah machmas mi'os. Something that's disgusting is considered to be muktzah. So what do you see from here? Rabbi Yehuda holds muktzah machmas mi'os. What's the tzushta? The Gemara is going to speak it out, but I mean, you can't even go weiter. What's the Zushtal? If Rabbi Yehuda holds a Muktzah Machmas Mius, Tain is the Gemara, Rabbi Yehuda should also hold of Muktzah Machmas Isser. A live animal is not Mius, right? Maybe if you grew up in Brooklyn it is, but it was not considered Mius. Ner, Cheres, Yashon is Mius. Okay, so what Shaykh is? It's because although a behema is not Mius, but a behema is Aser. Why is it Aser? What do you do with a behema? Eat it, save it menachai. Shecht it, it's one of the lamatas malachas. So it's aser. Work with it in the field, lav the mechamer, right? You can't do anything with it. Shvisa's behemta. And being that you can't do anything with it, it's muktzah machmas iser. So the tzushta Rosh Breder Ravidi was, you wonder which Rabbi Yehuda? Again, we know Rabbi Yehuda is a machmer muktzah. I know he holds muktzah machmas mias. If he holds muktzah machmas mias, it's mistabi. We hold muktzah machmas iser also. And what's the tzushta? Right? I'm not touching this because it's disgusting. I'm not touching this because it's spiritually disgusting to touch it. Because it's something that's aser, right? It's metamtem esalev. It's mias. I can't touch it. But the bottom is, you see, there's an idea with that Yehuda's machra muktzah machmas mias. It makes sense. Muktzah machmas iser would be the same. But the Gemara says mechateis. Maybe dafka muktzah machmas mias, not muktzah machmas iser. The Gemara says no, that is an incorrect tichoy. The Tanya, because we learned in the Brayso. Yehuda says kol nerish al matches. All neiros that are made of matches. So here you have a ner that's made of matches. By the way, in the lashon of Chazal, a ner is not the actual candle. The ner is the lamp, right, where the candle is. So you have the ner of cheres and the ner of matches. I thought a ner was made of wax, right? No. So the ner over here, that's made of matches. And what's the significance that it's made of matches? It doesn't get disgusting. So all neiros of matches metaltalin, chutz min haner shehedliku by ba'isa Shabbos, with the exception of a ner that you lit in the beginning of Shabbos. Now, who's saying this? Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says, I have a shita that a ner shal cheres you're not allowed to touch. Ner shal matches, that's fine. That's mius. That's not mius. But if you lit the ner b'tchilas HaShabbos, so when Shabbos came, it was the neiros or one of the neiros that you had lit, then it's going to be an issue. Why? It's the same, not mius. Oh, the teretz is because you weren't allowed to touch it then, because if you would move a candle on Shabbos, there's a concern that it may be extinguished. So because of a chashash kiboy, Zakrashi, therefore, you're not allowed to touch it. That's muktzah machmas iser. Oh, so it's mefurish. Rabbi Yehuda holds muktzah machmas iser. See, right? The tzushtal of mius to iser mehechatesi. But I have a mefurish Rabbi Yehuda that's not muktzah machmas iser. So that for sure this must be the Rabbi Yehuda. You want to know why Ashaychet b'Shabbos Shchitasek sheira, but it's gebei asur liyoyma. It's because Rabbi Yehuda holds muktzah machmas iser, and the animal was muchen la'adam. It's not noyelad. We addressed all those points, but at the same time, it was muktzah machmas iser. But the Gemara says I don't think it's a tzushah because if it's shani hasam, maybe over there, although you have a makad Rabbi Yehuda holds muktzah machmas iser, maybe dafke there to hu dachile biyadai. He was doichet biyadai. When you light the candle before Shabbos, you did a ma'isa to be doichid and to say that I'm not going near this, as opposed to a behema where you didn't do anything biyadayim. So being that you didn't do anything biyadayim, maybe over there's no halacha of muktzah machmas iser. Either way, the Gemara knocked out this fourth attempt, and we're going to stop here. So again, what's the sikum of the daf? The first part of the daf dealt with summa. We're going to get to that now in literally 1 second. The second part of the daf dealt with Hashoichet b'Shabbos u'b'Yom HaKippurim. The Mishnah said, Afal pisha mischayev ben nafshoy, shchitasek sheira. Stating that, Rav Huna said, that Chir bar Rav said, in the name of the great Rav, that even though shchitasek sheira asura b'achila liyoyim, the nosfen chavraya l'meimar, why would it be also during the day? If the shchitas kosher, if there's no mesachtas chulin issue, what would be the problem? Oh, Hamani Rabbi Yehudi. The question was, which Rabbi Yehuda? And we went through 4 Rabbi Yehudas. The first Rabbi Yehuda we went through was that Rabbi Yehuda holds that if a behema dies on Shabbos, you're not allowed to feed it to the dogs. Why? Because it wasn't muchen lachilas chlovim betchilas HaShabbos. So here too, l'chayra, if you shecht on Shabbos, you should be able to feed it to people because it wasn't muchen lachilas adam on Shabbos. Gemara was like that because it's clear that Rabbi Yehuda's shita is that a live animal is considered muchen lachilas adam. What's the raya to that? The raya is from the fact that you're allowed to shecht l'chatchila on Yontif, and we know shita's Rabbi Yehuda is in Brera, which was a big part of today's daf. The second attempt of the Gemara was that Rabbi Yehuda has a shita that if a keli breaks on Shabbos, the only time you're allowed to continue to use it is if you can use it me'in malachton. That's a contrast to the Chacham that say, as long as you use it me'in malacha, that's going to be okay. What do you see from here? That the only time something is considered muchan is if it didn't require any tikkun. But if you were able to use this, it was muchan to be used, but it required a tikkun for this particular ishtamshus, that ishtamshus is going to be awesome. An animal could be muchan la'adam, but you can't argue with the fact that it requires a shchita, which is a tikkun. So if that's the case, you see Rabbi Yehuda holds that would be a problem in the world of muktzah. But the Gemara was doiches. The Gemara said that's a poor understanding of that shittas Rabbi Yehuda. The reason Rabbi Yehuda holds that a keli that breaks has to be able to be used me'im malachtan is because otherwise it's going to be noila. When it comes to oichel, uchel, the ifrasu, it's never considered to be an issue. Gemara had a third Rabbi Yehuda, and that is Rabbi Yehuda, who has a mechudesh geshita in the world of mashkin hayotzim and apeiros, whether you're allowed to use it or not allowed to use it. But Moed Rabbi Yehuda agrees that if someone has zeisim v'anovim and mashkin comes out, you're not allowed to drink it because we're concerned you may go do schita from the zeisim and the anovim. Tainas the Gemara seems like a good analogy. If you have an animal that on its own or by mistake ended up shachot, I shouldn't be allowed to eat it because of a concern, I might do shchita. I can't drink the mashkin from the zeisim and the anovim because of a chash, I might do shchita. I can't eat the basa from this behemoth because of a chash. I may go ahead and do shchita. So Mar says it's a wonderful tzushdal. This is an amazing Rabbi Yehuda tzushdal. The problem is, Rav is the one whose besmedrish is handling this whole shaila, and Rav doesn't agree with that statement. Shmuel was the one that said it in the world of Rabbi Yehuda, not Rav, and therefore, for a technical reason, that can't be the pshat. The fourth mahalach the Gemara said is Rabbi Yehuda holds of muktzah machmas iser. So I think an animal is muktzah machmas iser, because not you could do it an animal really on Shabbos. So based on that, it should be considered muktzah. But the Gemara says the whole makar that Rabbi Yehuda holds of muktzah machmas iser is when you would dachile b'yadayim. Being that over here you want dachile b'yadayim, maybe over here it's going to be different. Either way, that is the sikum of today's daf, which again we're leaving in the middle of the daf, Be'ezer Hashem, part 2, which is the lighter part of the sugya, we're going to learn tomorrow. But as it relates to rate, just to speak out two ha'aras. So the first part of the daf, the way easier part of the daf, discussed whether or not a summa is allowed to shecht. And the truth is, it's a mefurish mishnah. Hashoichet balayla v'chein hasumma sheshachat shchitas ksher. The mishnah is mavur that a summa is kosher l'shchita, albeit b'di'ev. Not surprisingly, this Stam Mishnah that has no one that argues with it in the Gemara is brought down in Shulchan Aruch. The Mechaber in Yerudeya, Siman Aleph Sif Tes says, Summa lo yishchot lechatchila, elim kein acherim royen oisnai, ve'im shachat shchitasai kshera. So this halacha psuka of the Mishnah in Chulin Daf Yud Gimel Amud Beis is also a halacha psuka in Shulchan Aruch, in Yerudeya, Hilchas Shchita, Siman Aleph Siftes. Reb Kiva Eiger, in his Agoyas on this halacha, asks a kushya meforsemes. Kiva Eiger says, we know there's a shita in Shas, it's the shita of Reb Yehuda, ironically, who holds that a summa is potem in a-mitzvahs. Great Reb Kiva Eiger, the Beis Yosef in the North says that we're chayish l'shitas Reb Yehuda lahalacha. It's based on a Rabbeinu Yeruchim who says that the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda, and the Beis Yosef says that even though we don't paskin like Rabbeinu Yeruchim, and of course assume as chayv in mitzvahs, but at the same time michash miyabayi, and it's for that reason in areas of halacha we're always chayish for the sheet of Rabbi Yehuda that holds that assume as patim and mitzvahs. If that's the case, for Reb Kiva Eiger, how could the mechaber paskin? How could the Beis Yosef say that a summa, albeit b'di'evet, albeit if acher maroyin oisai, is allowed to shech? To the extent that we have to be chayish to the sheet of Rabbi Yehuda that assumes potem in mitzvahs, if he's potem in mitzvahs, it means he's not a bar zvicha. And if he's not a bar zvicha, then hadar dina, he's like an oivik kechavim, and an oivik kechavim, that was the Mishnah in yesterday's daf, shchitas oivik kechavim is nevela. So if that's the case, how could the Shulchan Aruch say that assumes allowed to shecht? L'chayra, l'shitas Rabbi Yehuda that assumes potem in mitzvahs, asuma doesn't need shchita. If he doesn't need shchita, he's mamish like an oivik kechavim. If he's like an oivik kechavim, that means he's not a bar zvicha. If he's not a bar zvicha, so that means he's not allowed to shecht, and his shchita should be shchitas nevela. Azoy fragt Reb Kiva Eiger, a kushya atzum. Says Reb Kiva Eiger, it's muchach from here. or you saw that the Achreinim talk about in different places, and that is that even Rabbi Yehuda that holds that a summa is patim and mitzvahs, it's only from mitzvahs aseh. It's not from mitzvahs lois aseh. And if you hold that a summa is really chayiv and mitzvahs lois aseh, so it comes out he has the lav of nevela. He might not have the aseh of shchita, and we can clear if he has the lav abba michlal aseh of shchita, but the lois aseh of nevela that he certainly has. Being that he has the lav of nevela, Zok Reb Kiva Eiger, he's a bar zvicha. If he's a bar zvicha, it's for that reason. And Zok Reb Kiva Eiger, this is a raya she'enol of tshuva lanias daiti. To the shittas that hold that even Rabbi Yehuda that holds that sumas patim and mitzvahs, it just means that a sumas patim from mitzvahs aseh, but avada he's going to be chayiv and mitzvahs leis aseh. This Reb Kiva Eiger is a mefursim dig Reb Kiva Eiger. Last machzor we had 2 raid bites on this Reb Kiva Eiger. I was thinking about Reb Kiva Eiger yesterday. It mamish bothered me. I mamish don't understand Reb Kiva Eiger. I mamish don't understand it. Hashem Yoreina. Reb Kiva Eiger had a halach in Shulchan Aruch that says a summa is allowed to shecht. Reb Kiva Eiger, according to Reb Yehuda, a summa is not a bar zvicha. And if a summa is not a bar zvicha, so why is a summa allowed to shecht? Why is a cher shayt v'katan allowed to shecht? A cher shayt v'katan are also patim and mitzvahs because they're not b'nei zvicha. Reb Yehuda's summa patim and mitzvahs is more than a cheresh shoyt of a cotton than a patim and mitzvahs, and a filu hachi, a cheresh shoyt of a cotton are allowed to shech. Now why? That's the Chuvas Noid of Yehuda. That's the shach in Siman Aleph. Kama kumas in the shtabru to be miyashiv. Why a cheresh shoyt of a cotton are allowed to shech? And why don't we say that a cheresh shoyt of a cotton are considered to be not bnei zvicha? So if that's the case, vos out Reb Kiva Eiger would assume. Kiva Eiger has a chap. According to Yehuda, Sumas patim and mitzvahs. So why is the Summa allowed to shecht? He's not a bar zvicha. That's mamish tonight to Yehuda's kasha in the first Tshuva in Madur Tinyana. That's the shach in Yeridea, Hilchos Shchita, Siman Aleph, Sif Chav Zayin. This is what the Tvur Shor discusses in Siman Aleph in Sifkat Mem Tes. What the Pri Megadim discusses in his Psicha Kaileles and Chelik Beis Sifkat and Gil. All the Gdei Lechreinim discuss this famous Shaila. So vos did Reb Kiva Eiger find in the halacha of Summa that all of a sudden that the Gehata Greise Knech? Lamaisa, Chipasti, Umatzasi. It's a sefer, it's called Shchitas Chulin. It was written by Rabbi Somer Garbuz, Shlita, the great guy in the Bnei Brak. And on this Mishnah, Hasheichet Balai Lavchin Asuma Sheshachas Shchitasik Sheira. This is what he says. B'chidush Reb Kiva Eiger, Kosav Lo Yichiach Mikan. The Aflu Rabbi Yehuda disfirulei the Sumer Patim and Mitzvahs Mikomokim Yesh Lo Yisurim the Ilav Hachi Amay Shchitasek Sheira Halav Bar Zvichahu Adkan V'Lo Zochisi Lahavin Kushiyasai the Mahuk Shel Agoyin Rabbi Kiva Eiger Misuma Tvei Micheres Shaita the Shchitasek Sheira Afal Gav Lo Musarin and then he fears is V'Doik. So I don't know what V'Doik means, but Zokta V'Lo Zochisi Lahavin Kushiyasai Baruch Shekivanti. But I thought about it. I think the Kash is the Tois. You have to be Yashav such Rabbi Kiva Eiger. This is a Reb Kiva Eiger that's mitzvah liyasha. I think it's Poshet Mamash, what Reb Kiva Eiger means. And that is, why is it that a cheresh shoyt v'katan are considered to be a bar zvicha? I cheresh shoyt v'katan apatim and mitzvahs. So we spoke yesterday from the Noid of Yehuda, that the Noid of Yehuda said that the reason is, because in as much as a cheresh shoyt v'katan apatim and mitzvahs, and that's why you find a katan is even not considered a bar kshira in the world of Stam, Erechaim, Siman Lametes, but at the same time, there's a lav of lois achilam. And because there's a lav of lois achilam, so it's for that reason, he's considered to be in the parsha of zvicha, because even though he himself, the cheresh and the shoyt and the katan are not muzer kishala atzman to not be able to go ahead and eat nevela, but at the same time gedolim are muzer to make sure that the ktanim are going to eat. And by the way, we didn't speak this out yesterday, but that's pashut, it's mavur from the Noid of Yehuda, that this halach of leis achilim is not only true for a katan, right? Even though it's always lahazer gedolim al ktanim. You see, it's true for a cheresh and it's true for a shaita as well. And the reason is because if it's only true for a katan, then the Noid of Yehuda only answered a third of the kasha, right? The kasha is all cheresh, shaitas, and katans are kasha to shchech, albeit if you check off all the right boxes. What do you mean? They're not b'nei zvicha. The terrace is leis achilim. One second, that's all good lahazer gedolim al ktanim. But what's going to be with a cheresh and a shaita? It's muchach mefurish in the Noid of Yehuda. This is the way it is. And the emes is, we spoke out years ago an epic tshuva from the Hilchos Sofer, and this is in Erechaim Simpei Gimel. It's one of the tshuvas hamefursamas where there was a shaita and there was an eitzah maybe for this shaita to have a refuah by sending him to some rehab facility. The problem is they were going to serve him non-kosher meat, and the Chassam Sofer wrote a whole tshuva whether it's okay, it's not okay. It's a niflid diga tshuva. And Toich Dvorav, he says, one thing. Bevadai kol she'anu muzarim al ktani b'nei Yisrael. Anu muzarim nami al cheres shoyte v'katan. Dekro de loisachilum lahazer hamitzuvim al she'enu mitzuvim yiyeh katan or yiyeh shoyte. It's a mefurish Chassam Sofer. And the emes is, I looked around a little bit, I found that the Beis Yosef in the end of Yeridei Simon Kufnan Zayin brings it mefurish b'shem Rabbeinu Yeruchim. It comes from the Rishonim, but it's muchach. It jumped off the night of Yehudi yesterday. But the bottom line is, so that's pashit, that there's a love of lois achilim when it comes to a cheresh shayt v'katan. And the night of Yehuda said that's the beer. Why we view a cheresh shayt v'katan as being bar zvicha. And we mentioned yesterday that really this night of Yehuda is a shach. And even though the Shach's a little bit sossum, but in Siman Aleph of Katan Chav Zayin, the Shach seems to be saying what the Neidah B'Yehuda is saying. And if you take a look at the Pri Megadim, who is a contemporary of the Neidah B'Yehuda, the Pri Megadim says Mefurish, was the Shach hat gemeint, is was the Neidah B'Yehuda. I mean, he doesn't quote the Neidah B'Yehuda, but he says this far. It's because of Yevamas Kuf Yodalet. It's based on the love of Loisachil. So the Yisoid of why a Cher Shayt V'Katan are considered Bar Zvicha, it's because of the fact that there's a love of Loisachil. So here's the Shaila. Does a shayta have loisach? Does a summa l'Rab Yehuda have loisachil? So my muschar rishon, sheni, and shlishi was of course. Why wouldn't he have loisachilim? But I think it's a tois gadol. I think it's a tois atzam. You know why? What's the whole yisoid of loisachilim? The yisoid of loisachilim is there's a cher shayt v'katan. We would love for a cher shayt v'katan to be chayiv mitzvahs. Narvas, we're partnering him. Why are we partnering? Because he doesn't have das. A cher shayt v'katan don't have the das to be nizer in Taryag mitzvahs. And because they don't have the das to be nizer in Taryag mitzvahs, it's for that reason the Torah exempted them from Taryag mitzvahs. Stating that, there's a musik of Loisachilum. And Loisachilum says, Lahazer agdoilam alaktanim. With the katan and the, like we some soifer say, the cheresh and shoyta as well, where they don't have das to be nizer by themselves, so we have a responsibility and we have an obligation to go ahead and be responsible for them. Lahazer agdoilam alaktanim. We wish they would keep Torah mitzvahs. No, of us, they don't know how to. So there's an inyan of loisachilum. Now, why is it only true for loisaseis and not aseis? You know, we said over for Rabbi Chanan and Kavitzaris, he said, Sorachim, Shamati lechalik ben asei v'loisasei. I'm not really sure what the chilik is. By the way, what we didn't mention yesterday is the Trumas Hadeshin says a very simple pshat. He says that when a person does a loisasei, there's a chash. Now, when you get older, you'll continue to do the loisaseis. By an asei, there's no, based on Lashon HaGemara and Shabbos, Gzeir Shema Yisrach. By a loisasei, there's a chash Shema Yisrach. By an asei, there's not. We spoke out, maybe it's related to the Gemara Yuma Lamed Tes, the machshava of Mesach. But here's the bottom line. The bottom line is the whole yisoid of Loisachilum is we have a cheresh shayt v'katan that are fartige yidden. We want them very much to be able to keep Torah mitzvahs. Narvas, they're not pekoyach. They don't have the ability to do so. So therefore, Loisachilum lahazar gdolim alaktanim. Asuma afilu aliba de Rabbi Yehuda has das. He could take care of himself. He doesn't know what to take care of him. He could take care of himself. And afilu hachi, Rabbi Yehuda has a shita that assumes patim and mitzvahs. So if Rabbi Yehuda has a shita that assumes patim and mitzvahs, despite the fact that he could take care of himself, what does that mean? It means he's patim and mitzvahs. So what are you going to tell me? There's a loisachilim lahazak doim. It doesn't even make any sense. You can't even say it. Why would there be a loisachilim? Someone that we bet him want should keep Torah mitzvahs. None of us, he can't be nizer in Torah mitzvahs. So there's an inyan of loisachilim lahazak doim alaktanim. A summa could take care of himself with Torah mitzvahs. But the Torah said, afilu hachi, you're potter. What, so I'm potter if to eat nevela, but you can't feed me nevela? It makes no sense. There's no havana. If the Torah doesn't care about me eating nevela, so why would the Torah have a problem with somebody else feeding me nevela? The whole point is, by the cheresh shayt v'katan, the way we teach him up is not that the Torah doesn't care if he eats nevela. He just can't be nizer because he's not a bardas. So good. Why Lavin and Essen? Good. That's the rate. But the bottom line is, we care about him as a result, where he can't be nizer. Comes again, loisachilim, it says he should be nizer. But to zogin, I said, I love from loisachilim by a shaita, by a summa, alibid Rabbi Yehuda is mamish built-in muffin. Why would that be the case? The Torah doesn't have a problem with him eating the nevela, but the Torah has a problem with loisachilim. You worried about the issues of love, and then you worried about the issues of love. Elamai, you're not worried. Why? Good. That's shittas Rabbi Yehuda. We don't pass on Rabbi Yehuda, but whatever. That is the shit of Rabbi Yehuda. So I feel that shittas Rabbi Yehuda, this is talking loisachilim. If the there's no lois achilam, it's posh, it doesn't commit Reb Kiva Eger. Reb Kiva Eger knew Chereshoit of a katan. He knew Chereshoit of a katan. He knew the Noid Yehuda, the svar of the Noid Yehuda. It's posh, he knew it's a shach. The Prima Godon learned up the shach. These are Reb Kiva Eger's Maramakoimas always. Reb Kiva knows all this raid. Avad Reb Kiva Eger knew that Chereshoit of a katan is considered a bar zvicha. Why? Because of lois achilam. But also, Reb Kiva Eger was that I don't think Suma the Rabbi Yehuda has a lois achilam. What do you mean? It's not only true for katan, it's also true for cheresh for shaita. Kimavur and Chuvas Noid Yehuda, Kimavur and Chuvas Chasam Sefer. It's really based on B'Shem Rabbeinu Yerucham. Yeah, but Atzad Hashava Shebehen is that the reason they're potem and mitzvahs is because they're not bnei das, and being that it's because they're not bnei das, memela they don't have the lav. Memela they be'etzim shaykh to mitzvahs. Not us they don't know how to be nizul. There's a music of leisachilum, but a sumo can take care of himself. Even just the whole concept of telling a person, be careful, don't feed this. Sumo can take care of himself. Right? It's a daita de nafshe, even when you are meichel him in almost every single case. The whole concept of leisachilum is a little built-in movement when it comes to a summa, and it could be the whole Reb Kiva Eger was coming nach the Noid Yehuda, nach the Shach and the Prima Godim, nach all this raid, and that's what Reb Kiva Eger said. I understand Cheresh Shoit of a Katan. What I don't understand is why would a summa be different? I was discussing this yesterday with Yedidi, Rabbi Yisrael Chanan Lipschitz, and he said, Ulai, maybe you can bring a raya from Tosfos and Bava Kama, Daf Pei Zayin Amud Aleph. Tosfos says a very famous chiddush. He says that even according to Rabbi Yehuda, that holds summas potem in our mitzvahs, but he's chayiv in mitzvahs to Rabbanon. Right? That's what Tosfos says. And Tosfos, his lashon is like this. V'nira. Da'afagav the potter Rabbi Yehuda summa mikol mitzvahs. Mikol mokem midrabanon chayiv. Da'afagav the isha miftir of a mitzvah seishes mangarama v'lei mechayiv afilu midrabanon. Right? Women are potter from mitzvah seishes mangarama. You don't find that chayiv midrabanon. Mishum sheyesh mitzvah is harbi de mechayiv b'hu. Because they have other mitzvahs that they're chayiv in. Avol summa ipatris lei mikol ha-mitzvahs. Afilu midrabanon imkein havelei k'moy nochri she'einoi noyeg b'toiras yisrael. If you're not going to tell him that he's chayv mitzvah rabbanon, he's mamash a guy. If there's a lois achilum when it comes to a summa, does it pass to say that he's a nachri she'enoi noyag boy b'toyres Yisrael klal? Either way, it's just a ha'ara. But I think as it relates to pshat and Reb Kiva, I think it's poshet adlam ma'od. Reb Kiva held that the chereshoit of a katan are considered bar zvicha because of the fact that there's a lav of lois achilam. Reb Kiva is being megala to us in this shtickle is that there's no lois achilam when it comes to a summa. What would be the svar? I think the svar is pashet by a chereshoit of a katan, where the reason that potter is because they don't have das. So there it makes sense lahazar agdoilam alaktanim. But the summa hotoch das. The summa could take care of himself, and afilu hachi. So what? Because now you have a gadol that has das and he knows to be careful for you. If I don't have to be careful for myself, why do you have to be careful for me? It's something that's mechusar avana, elamai shteita and summa, a different reason. It's summa, there's another knetch over here. You have to say a summa is considered a bar zvicha for something a little more fundamental. So Reb Kiva, a raya berura to the shittas that hold that a summa is chayiv and loisase. If a summa is chayiv and loisase, again, basi rak la'oira, just to throw out a little bit of raid, we are going to stop here.